Psychopaths love a good riddle. What better way to flaunt your intelligence to some hapless police officers than by turning your crime spree into one big mind game? One of the most famous examples is the son of Sam. That killer fell victim to his own ego when the cops caught him by tracing the clues in his crime scene letters. Today, we'll be looking at a lesser-known case of a murderer toying with the cops. This one also went down in history, but for slightly different reasons. In 1983, cops in Miami came up against one such devious intellect when the body of a foreign national turned up in a car park. What looked like an everyday act of violence soon turned into a game of intellectual cat and mouse when a cryptic clue was found nearby. So began a mind-bending hunt for the culprit in what would come to be known as the Liquid Matthew murder. Welcome to 10-Minute Murder, brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe, the host, and thank you for joining today. And I bet you cannot guess who's sick again. I know it's extremely difficult to tell, but it's me. I'm sick. I'm sick again. I don't know how this keeps happening. Nonetheless, I appreciate you being here, and please excuse any brain fog that I may have during this episode. I'm taking all the cold medicine, all of it that I can get my hands on. I've been taking it, trying to make it to where I can breathe and I can talk without sounding like the Cookie Monster. So here we are, and we'll get through it. But if I make any mistakes, I may or may not miss them. Because I'm not kidding, that cold medicine does something weird to your brain. You can't really think clearly. I don't know what the deal is. But before we get going with your story today, this is your official reminder to subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. Connect with 10-Minute Murder on social media. Links are in the show notes of this episode, as well as at 10minutemurder.com. Now to today's story. Two joggers were out running in Miami's Hialeah neighborhood on Sunday night, December 6th, 1983, when they stumbled across a man lying face down in a car park. And that's not an uncommon occurrence in Florida or many other places, but judging by the state of the guy, he wasn't on the tail end of a mega bender. A closer look confirmed he was stone cold dead. When the police arrived to investigate, they found that the man, a Colombian national named Patino Gutierrez, had been strangled to death. The time of death was likely earlier that same evening, but nobody in the area had seen anything suspicious. There wasn't much immediately apparent evidence-wise either. The cops sealed off the scene and began taking pictures of the area, but progress was stifled with a heavy thunderstorm when it swept across the city, forcing the detectives to retire for the night until the weather cleared. The next morning, they returned for a proper sweep of the area. But rather than a murder weapon or traces of DNA, they found an even more compelling clue. Lifted straight out of the pages of a cheesy mystery novel, taped onto the back of a no dumping sign at the edge of the parking lot, just meters away from where the body was found, was a plastic bag. A sheet of paper was folded up inside, only slightly damp despite the downpour. It was a neatly typed letter featuring a cryptic clue. Once you're back on the track, you'll travel in night, so prepare your old self for a terrible fright. Now, the motive is clear and the victim is too. You've got all the answers. Just follow the clues. And I know what you're thinking. Holy mackerel, Batman, the Riddler is struck again. But unfortunately, Batman's jurisdiction doesn't extend to Florida. The cops were left to crack this code on their own. Still, it was hardly the Zodiac cipher. Surely it wouldn't take a team of ace detectives that long to figure it out. Just in case they were wasting time on a hoax, they checked through the crime scene photos from the night before, and sure enough, that bag was poking out at the back of the sign, hidden just out of sight all along. It didn't magically appear after the rainstorm. Sergeant David Miller was the one tasked with following the trail of this strange message. It was the kind of classic Agatha Christie detective stuff that dreams are made of, a chance to go head-to-head with a villain, a real career-making case. But it wouldn't be easy. Maybe there's some key info left out of the middle of the quote, but regardless, it seemed like the detective didn't have much to go on. For one, the killer suggested that the motive should be obvious, but it was really anything but obvious. Could the letter be giving coded directions to some location in town? Maybe back on the track alluded to following some train tracks. Maybe the terrible fright suggested a Halloween costume store. I don't know. I'm terrible at riddles. But the point is, Sergeant Miller wasn't. Somehow he managed to crack it in under an hour. His keen intuitions helped him track down a second clue, sealed in a plastic bag just like the last one. Who knew how many there might be strewn around the city, or if the devious murderer would be waiting at the end of the line. This one was taped to the back of a speed limit sign, a few minutes down the road from the murder scene. Its message was more macabre than the last one. Yes, Matthew is dead, but his body not felt. Those brains were not Matt's because his body did melt. For Billy threw Matt in some hot, boiling oil. To confuse the police, for the mystery they did toil. Jesus, it sounds like Mr. Gutierrez, the guy who is the actual victim in this case, got a better deal than this Matthew guy. Perhaps the killer was boasting about another victim whose liquefied remains were waiting at the end of the trail. If so, then the dead guy in the car park might just have been killed to kickstart this little game. Or maybe, as the end of the clue suggests, it was all a ruse to waste police time in the crucial early stages of an investigation. If so, it worked like a charm. Nobody could quite work out the meaning of this second riddle. The mention of boiling this poor guy in hot oil didn't directly suggest anywhere in the vicinity. Somewhere with the deep fryer. Like a fast food restaurant maybe. I don't know. The cops ran into dead ends too. After several more days of making zero headway, Sergeant Miller decided to appeal to the public for help. Locals opened their copies of the Miami Herald to a bonus puzzle page featuring an appeal for information about that second clue. The cops were asking for anything that could either help solve the riddle or cut the BS and identify the writer directly. Some budding amateur detectives no doubt tried to crack the case, a case now known as the Liquid Matthew murder, but it wasn't long before a more direct tip came in. This crafty criminal was among those who spotted the riddle in the paper that day. He contacted the police, but not to taunt them with a diabolical monologue. He actually wanted to clear something important up. A little over a week after the body was first found, the Miami Riddler rang up the police tip line and identified himself. He was the leader of a local Christian youth group. So what drove this young man to commit such a violent, senseless crime? Money? Drugs? Sheer bloodlust? Well, actually, none of that. In fact, the devout young man didn't even actually commit a crime at all, despite maybe perhaps a minor bit of littering. And it had to be a painfully awkward phone call. But yes, he did post those riddles there, but they had nothing to do with the murder. In fact, they'd been hanging there for months before the victim even died. Every Halloween, their church group ran a blood and guts themed treasure hunt for the young people at 4 local churches. It was predicted to rain back on that night in October, so they put the clues in plastic bags just in case they got ruined. Sure enough, it started raining buckets partway through, meaning the murder mystery game and the clues had to be abandoned. They never bothered going back to collect the remaining clues. I mean, what are the odds that an actual real-life murder would occur right next to one of them? That's some astronomically bad luck for everyone involved. Soon, another churchgoer called to confirm that story. The detectives had been inadvertently playing a children's game rather than chasing a murderer. And just like that, the mystery of the Miami murder riddles was solved in the most ridiculous way imaginable. But hold on, the whole thing wasn't really about solving some scavenger hunt. Who actually murdered Mr. Gutierrez? The answer to that is we have no idea. Whoever strangled Francisco Patino Gutierrez to death in that parking lot was never found. The alternative avenues of inquiry revealed some actual clues about why the guy was killed. He worked as a sailor and recently arrived in Miami via Panama. The ship he was on got raided when it arrived at the port, and the cops seized 11 pounds of cocaine on board. Gutierrez was a suspect in the smuggling case, and his untimely end seemed to confirm the authorities' suspicion. Drug cartels don't usually have a forgive and forget type mentality, so it's likely he was assassinated in retaliation for the seized cargo. And that was the official conclusion when the case closed on December 19th, 1983.